Hey guys, this is the Uber Elite, and this is a showcase of my Necromancer Poison Bladefall Totem build. This build has been one of the more interesting builds that I've created, and really showcases a lot of interesting and perhaps even broken mechanics involving the Necromancer Ascendancy. This build is heavily synergistic on its own, but also ends up working very well in parties with others, while still just having great clear speed, great defenses, great single target damage. It's not a cheap build in the slightest, but even if you can't afford it, I still hope you'll watch this video because there's a lot of weird mechanics going on here, and I hope that you can at least learn something even if you can't afford to play the build. Hope you guys enjoy. So let's start talking about the passive tree. Why did we choose to go Necromancer for this build? Well, besides from the benefits of Mistress of Sacrifice and Scourge double dipping with minion damage, we have to talk about one thing in particular, Commander of Darkness. Commander of Darkness is one of the huge carries in this build. And while we're running 6 auras, you might say, but that's only 60% damage and 30% cast speed. However, that's not the case. With the case of Commander of Darkness, the first thing to note is that aura effectiveness actually applies to Commander of Darkness. With this tree, we have 54% aura effectiveness, which means that this node is actually giving 15% increased damage per aura, as well as 7% attack and cast speed. However, even that isn't enough to explain how much we're getting out of it. You see, when it comes to totems, totems have a unique thing where they are able to be affected by defensive auras, but not offensive auras. If I cast a totem and cast an offensive aura, such as Hatred, you'll notice that the totem doesn't actually gain a blue circle under it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll see after I cast Purity of Ice. Because Purity of Ice is a defensive aura, it is able to affect totems. This is because totems are using your damage and not your defenses. So defensive auras are able to affect totems in order to raise their defenses. However, with the Commander of Darkness Ascendancy point, this ends up causing Commander of Darkness bonuses to apply twice, both to you and to the totem. So, when it comes to Bladefall totems, we are actually gaining 180% damage and 84% cast speed when we are in range of the totems. This ends up being a huge boost. On top of that, this also influences some of our other gear choices, such as opting to use the Scourge to make use of all the minion damage. We also end up going Spirit Offering for extra physical Additus Chaos, which we'll go into later. The rest of the passive tree is pretty straightforward. We need Ancestral Bond to maximize the damage because 2 totems are better than 1. We get a Zealot's Oath to regen some of our energy shield because we don't have any leech ourselves. We are obviously getting AoE to scale the coverage of our Bladefall. We get extra minion damage for double dip damage, as well as totem damage, which also double dips and gives us extra totem placement speed. And pretty much any ES we can get. One important thing to note is that the Conqueror's Efficiency Crimson Jewel that you get from Merciless Crypt is actually very important in this build because of the reduced mana reservation. This allows us to run all the auras that we need, and in the normal socket for Energy from Within, we actually opted to run Healthy Mind. The reason for this is that we ended up having very little mana to cast our totems, and this ended up causing the build to be a little bit clunkier than expected. As such, we opted for the Healthy Mind to get a ton of mana, as well as also having the benefit of gaining Silence Corruption on the Jewel. Other than that, the other 2 jewel sockets are just double dipping damage, such as totem damage, minion damage, area damage, and I am currently working towards getting the starting shadow nodes because they're some of the best nodes I can get for DPS at this point. To further showcase my point, I'm going to show you guys how much my tooltip gets affected by having 6 auras up. Temp Chains doesn't do anything for me, so I'll go ahead and cast that now, but this is my tooltip with Pain Attunement active. if I cast my 6 auras, you'll see that the tooltip ends up going way higher than it was before. Almost 5,000 higher, as a matter of fact, with all my auras active. This doesn't even take into account the fact that this is going to apply twice to the totem. So, this damage ends up being an understatement on how much I'm actually doing. So let's get into our gear setup. We have a few obvious choices, such as Presence of Chayla, which is really good for low life builds and gives us our Cannot Be Stunned, as well as a lot of extra ES. We have Shavron's Wrappings, which is best in slot for just about any low life build. And of course we have Scourge, because we want to use that juicy double dip minion damage. However, we have an important thing to go over, which is the helmet. The helmet is a essence crafted helmet with Shrieking Essence of Loathing, which gives us 4% reduced mana reservation on the helmet. Combine this with a level 4 Enlighten, and we are able to run all of our auras without having too little mana to cast the totem. If you do not have the currency, or there is not a level 4 Enlighten available, a level 3 will do perfectly fine, as long as you switch the helmet enchant to a reduced mana reservation. On our life, we are running Discipline, Purity of Ice, and Clarity. And on our mana, linked to a level 4 Enlighten are Purity of Fire, Grace, and Purity of Lightning. Other than that, we also run a Blasphemy Temp Chains on our mana, which is just one of the best defensive and offensive options when you're running a poison build. All of this leaves us very socket starved, so we only run a 2-link cast on damage taken Immortal Call. In our shield, we have an increased duration Wither plus Foul Discipline. In our weapon, we have a faster attack shield charge, as well as a Spirit Offering, and in an unset ring, we even have a Foul Lightning Trap. When you need corpses on demand, you can switch the faster attacks to a Desecrate gem. For our main skill, we have Bladefall linked with Poison, Spell Totem, Added Chaos, Controlled Destruction, and Void Manipulation. For a single target, you switch the Added Chaos to the Conk Effect gem. Conk Effect ends up being more damage because of how much chaos damage we gain from Spirit Offering, as well as our unique flask Sin's Rebirth. With our flasks, our unique flask of choice is of course Sin's Rebirth, as I just mentioned. Sin's Rebirth ends up being the most consistent option for us to gain chaos damage from our physical damage. This is because it only costs 10 charges per use, has 3 total uses baseline, and lasts 6 seconds. It also boosts our Grace evasion. So this ends up being one of the best flasks to use. It also should be noted that this is currently bugged, and actually the Unholy Might is benefiting from flask nodes, but because I don't even have the flask nodes on this build yet, you shouldn't worry about the damage because of that. Other than that, we have Physical Mitigation Flasks, because that is really the only thing this build lacks, a Silver Flask for regen and damage, and a Silver Flask to go faster with shield charge, and to cast faster as well. These flasks are all modded individually with different things to deal with status ailments, such as remove shock, curse, freeze, and bleeding to deal with all of the status ailments. With all of our buffs up, we end up getting a huge amount of damage increase simply by using flasks as well as Spirit Offering. As you can see, the tooltip ends up going to 33.8k. And we end up getting a crap load of chaos damage. On top of this tooltip boost from all of these buffs, we also have Val Lightning Trap to shock enemies, which is a huge damage boost for double dip damage, as well as Wither to self-cast while our totems are wailing away at a boss. Now, this results in huge amounts of damage, and bosses melt pretty quickly once you have everything going, except for tier 16s. Tier 16 bosses that are not poison immune are absolutely doable with this build, but I have yet to test on the non-poison immunes, and I have yet to test against Shaper as well. Other interesting mechanics to note are Spirit Offering. Other than giving us added chaos damage based off of our physical, it also gives us not only an ES boost, but also heals our ES every time we use it. This basically works similar to almost something like an energy shield potion, which keeps our energy shield high all the time, as long as we keep using the skill. There are also options to add even more damage by replacing things that we use on Flasks with things that give us straight up immunities. We can use the Death's Door unique boots to make ourselves completely immune to bleed, and replace our bleed removal flask with something like an Atziri's flask. We can also replace our freeze removal with a Dream Fragments, which also allows us to potentially get rid of the Healthy Mind Jewel. This also allows us to run another unique flask, although we'll be getting chilled from time to time. We could potentially use a Vinctars as well for the shock. This is a lot of damage increase. However, I've found that I don't really seem to need this amount of damage, although it is really fun to play with, and I have been able to play with it before. This character has been very interesting to me to see how strong Commander of Darkness really is. I managed to make a character that not only works very well in parties, but also works well on its own. However, thinking about how strong Commander of Darkness is in this build only makes me realize that Commander of Darkness on supports is even more crazy, and combining a support that fully abuses this alongside somebody that plays a different ascendancy can really abuse this to an extreme maximum. Imagine if I was playing an Elementalist Flame Blast totems, but I had the support of somebody using Generosity auras on top of me using all the Elementalist passives and totems. You end up with a lot of insane damage and cast speed, and this really just goes to show how insane Necro support really is when you think about it. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed and perhaps learned something, or I piqued your interest in a new build, or some interesting concepts. This is the Uber Elite signing off. I'll see you guys later.